Ever feel like you're hitting the gas but going nowhere? Like something's holding you back?
Oh, absolutely.
Today, we're diving deep into those invisible forces that keep us stuck and how to break free.
Sounds fascinating.
We're going to unpack how even small moments from our past can create patterns that play out in our adult lives.
Interesting.
And get this, we'll even explore how to rewire our brains with something as simple as a high five.
I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Our guide today is Mel Robbins.
A motivational powerhouse,
Exactly. She blends her personal stories
which are incredibly relatable.
with research-backed strategies to help us transform our lives.
What I find fascinating about Robbins is she doesn't just tell you to think positive.
Right.
She digs deeper into the science of anxiety and gives us practical tools, like the 5-second rule and the high five habit.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Robbins talks about a time when she was abused as a child. It wasn't a major incident, at least not outwardly, but it triggered decades of anxiety for her and coping mechanisms. It makes you wonder, how can one seemingly small experience have such a lasting impact?
This gets into how our brains, especially young brains, process trauma. It's pretty fascinating and heartbreaking at the same time. Picture this. Key areas like your amygdala, that's the part that processes emotions, and the hippocampus, which is responsible for memory, they're still developing.
Okay.
So when a child experiences something that they can't fully comprehend, their brain can get wired to internalize blame.
That what's wrong with me feeling.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And because those neural pathways are still forming, those responses to stress and fear, they become deeply ingrained, often on an unconscious level, like a program running in the background that influences our behaviors and reactions without us even realizing it.
And it's not always some big dramatic event. I mean, Robbins talks about the universal experience of the school cafeteria.
Oh, yeah.
You go from being a carefree kid, excited to see your friends, to suddenly scanning the room, worrying about where you fit in.
Oh, absolutely. Talk about relatable, right?
Oh, 100%.
That's social comparison taking hold.
Yeah.
And often bringing with it a healthy dose of self-doubt. Our sense of self-worth gets tangled up with external validation. We crave approval. We fear judgment. And those patterns that get established in those formative years, they can linger for decades.
It's like we trade in our self-love for a seat at the cool kids table and end up carrying that insecurity with us long after the lunch bell stops ringing.
Exactly. And this is where anxiety comes into play.
Yeah.
What's interesting is that Robbins reframes anxiety. It's not a weakness.
Right.
It's like a vital alarm system that's gone a little bit haywire.
So it's like our internal bodyguard is constantly on high alert, even when there's no real threat.
That's a great way to put it. It's like that truck is always pulling out in front of us, even when we're just trying to parallel park.
And this isn't just theoretical for Robbins. She was a very, very homesick kid.
Yes.
Crippling homesickness.
She's been there.
And this feeling of just constantly being on edge.
That's what makes her work so powerful.
Yeah.
She gets it. She's lived it.
And it was during one of her lowest points that she kind of stumbled on this crazy, simple, yet surprisingly effective tool that she calls the 5-second rule.
The 5-second rule.
Have you ever felt that wave of hesitation?
Oh, yeah.
The urge to procrastinate or talk yourself out of something?
All the time.
Okay, so next time that happens, here's what you do. Count backwards from 5, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Okay.
This simple act of counting interrupts those automatic habitual pathways in the brain.
It's like you're hitting the pause button
Exactly.
on your autopilot.
Yes, and it forces your prefrontal cortex, the decision-making part of your brain, back online.
I love that.
And here's the kicker. You have to immediately take action. Whatever it was you were hesitating on, you have to do it.
So no time for second guessing or letting those doubts creep back in.
You're hacking your brain's reward system.
You're shifting gears from autopilot to manual, taking control of your actions, and then your thoughts and feelings follow.
Ooh, I like that. Reclaiming our power 1 5-second countdown at a time.
That's right.
But speaking of powerful tools, Robbins has another one up her sleeve.
Yeah.
And this one might sound a little unorthodox.
You're talking about the high five habit, right?
Yes.
I have to admit, the first time I heard about this, I was a little skeptical.
Who high-fives their reflection?
Yeah.
Especially in the middle of a global pandemic.
Exactly.
But that's exactly what Robbins did.
Wow.
She was feeling, just overwhelmed, burnt out.
Right.
And in a moment of pure instinct, she looked in the mirror and high-fived her reflection.
I mean, okay, but how does something as simple as a high five create that kind of shift.
Right.
Because on the surface, it seems a little out there.
Right.
But there's actual science behind it.
Okay.
Remember those mirror neurons we talked about earlier?
Remind me about those.
They're these cells in our brains that fire both when we perform an action
Okay.
and when we observe someone else performing the same action.
Okay.
It's the reason why we wince when we see someone else get hurt, or we feel a surge of joy when we see someone smile.
Yeah, we're hardwired for empathy and connection.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So when you high-five your reflection,
Okay.
your brain interprets it as another person, someone you care about celebrating you.
Wow, so we're tapping into that primal need for connection and validation, but directing it inward.
Exactly.
That's so cool.
And here's the other fascinating part. High fives are already ingrained in our subconscious
Okay.
as symbols of celebration, connection, achievement.
Right?
Think about it. We high five at sporting events after closing a deal.
Yes.
We even high five when we successfully navigate a crowded parking lot.
It's true.
Right.
Our brains associate high fives with good vibes, with positive reinforcement.
Yeah.
So when you high five yourself, you're basically hacking your brain's reward system again.
You got it. And the best part is, it doesn't feel like a chore
Right.
or something you have to force yourself to do.
Right.
It's playful, it's unexpected,
Yeah.
and it taps into this childlike sense of joy and wonder.
It's like giving yourself permission to celebrate those small victories.
Yes.
Those everyday wins that we often overlook.
Absolutely.
I'm starting to think Robbins is really onto something with all these hacks.
And here's another layer to this whole high five thing. It's not just happening in our heads.
Okay.
There's a powerful mind-body connection at play.
Okay. Tell me more.
It's all about behavioral activation.
Okay.
Our brains don't just influence our actions. Our actions influence our brains.
Interesting.
When we start acting like the person we want to be,
Okay.
even if it feels a little silly at first,
Yeah.
our brains start to catch up.
So we're tricking our brains into believing we're already that confident, self-assured person.
It's not so much tricking as it is rewiring.
Okay.
Remember those neural pathways?
Yeah.
The more we engage in behaviors that support our desired self-image,
Uh-huh.
the stronger those pathways become.
So we're essentially training our brains for confidence and self-acceptance one high five at a time.
That's right.
This is fascinating stuff.
Yeah, it really challenges that traditional fake it till you make it approach.
Right.
Because it's not about faking it. It's about creating those real tangible shifts
Right.
in our energy, our behavior, and ultimately our neural pathways.
Right.
And what I appreciate about Robbins is that she's very open about the fact that this is a process.
Yes.
It's not a destination.
Yeah.
It's not about reaching this perfect state of unwavering self-love.
She's incredibly honest about the fact that she still struggles with self-doubt.
Oh, yeah.
And, those old patterns can creep back in even after all the work she's done.
And that's what makes her so relatable.
Right.
Especially for those of us who might look at someone like Robbins, a best-selling author, motivational powerhouse, and think, well, she's got it all figured out.
Yeah.
It must be easier for her.
Right.
And she even tells this story about getting snubbed by the New York Times.
Right.
And even though she's at this pinnacle of success, this relatively small event triggers those deep-seated feelings
Right.
of not being good enough.
It's so humanizing.
It highlights that we all have these ingrained patterns, these vulnerabilities, even when we achieve a certain level of external success.
Yeah.
It's not about eradicating those parts of ourselves.
Right.
It's about learning to navigate them with more self-compassion and resilience.
It makes you realize we're all a work in progress,
We are.
constantly evolving and learning.
Always.
So what's the takeaway here? What do we do with all this insight?
It's about recognizing that feeling stuck or experiencing self-doubt, it isn't a sign of failure.
Okay.
It's a signal that we've stopped growing.
Okay.
It's our internal compass urging us to course correct,
That's a great reframe.
to explore new ways of being and relating to ourselves.
Instead of beating ourselves up, we can view those moments as opportunities for growth.
Exactly.
I like that a lot.
And Robbins emphasizes this journey isn't about achieving some Instagram-worthy version of self-love
Right.
where we're always happy and confident and, everything's perfect.
Right.
It's about learning to ride the waves of life
Yeah.
with all its ups and downs with a little more grace and self-acceptance.
It's about embracing the messiness, the imperfections.
Yeah.
Because that's where the real growth happens.
That's where the good stuff is, right?
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's one thing our listeners can take away and start implementing today?
If you find yourself feeling stuck, start by shifting your internal dialogue.
Okay.
That voice in your head. Treat it like you would a friend.
Okay.
Offer yourself the same kindness and support that you would someone you care about.
And don't forget the power of simple actions.
That's right.
A 5-second countdown can interrupt those negative thought spirals.
Absolutely.
And a high five, well, that's just a dose of instant self-celebration.
It's all about building that self-trust, that belief that even when things get tough, we have the inner resources to navigate it.
Yes, we do.
And sometimes that means giving ourselves a high five along the way.
I love it. This has been such an insightful and empowering deep dive.
It has been fun.
Remember, you are capable of incredible change.
You are.
It starts with small steps, a little self-compassion, and maybe a well-timed high five in the mirror.
I love it.
That's it for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.